Okay, so we're back again. You'll have to see the bloopers that I'll tack on to the end of this one, or listen to them anyway. So this has had a chance to dry overnight, and I just wanted to point out that the colors pretty much stayed vibrant and true, and that I think is one of the differences between an artist grade watercolor and a student grade watercolor, is that there's a lot less change when the paint's dry. There are other things as well, like longevity and lights, whether the light fastness, but even some of the artist grade ones have a different reading on light fastness based on the materials that are used to create them. But one of the good benefits, I guess, of using the higher quality watercolors is simply that you have less of a fading of the more vibrant, vivid colors. So I'm going to start out actually with going ahead and getting this applied down, because this does take a while to dry, and I do definitely want to do more work over it. So I'm just going to apply it with some matte medium. I'm actually using the fluid matte medium, which has the better health grade. And let's see, I have a brush right here. Oh, I just need to find a paint rag, because it's number one disappeared, and number two, it disappeared under a cat. There's a drawback to working on your bed, sort of, because I'm like at the edge of my bed. But the drawback to it is that the cats are like, oh, we'll just sleep here on top of your art materials. So I can't remember exactly how big it is. I'm just going to put the fluid matte medium down over the entire area. Now, when you're working with a paper napkin such as this, it's nice because if you're not as precise, if you miss a little section, it'll soak through when you paint down, you know, the tissue paper or paper napkin from the top. Now, the only thing that I really want to worry about is this higher edge or house or whatever. I don't want that right over top of her. So I'm just going to line it up so that that is kind of my focus. And I'm also going to put the blue, what do you call that? There's a name for that. The blue, the two-toned or monochromatic checks. Oh, darn, I think it starts with a G. I can't remember. But I want to kind of keep that off of the edge. I'm not going to use that at this point. So now I'm just going to go over this and adhere, make sure all of the paper napkin is adhered down well and is flat. I don't mind wrinkles or anything. I mostly just want to make sure it's not going to come up and tear off later, which could indeed happen if it wasn't adhered down really well. So that's the only real concern. And of course, you don't want too many bubbles or anything like that in it for the same reason. So you can see how it goes, you know, goes nicely transparent because there's so many little white dots in it, plus the light pink is clearly a much lighter color. As well, it's kind of nice the way it's positioned, because some of the houses kind of go off the edge, and that's kind of good as far as visually letting it sort of flow off. Now, I've let it sit here for just a minute, so if I kind of gently lift it, I can, well, I thought I could pull it away easily, but I had to lift the edge, and so that lifts it up. But you can see how you can almost just kind of paint it right off of there with the paintbrush. I didn't get this one as wet, I don't think. I can come back with a craft knife of some sort and clean that edge up completely, and otherwise I am going to just pause for a minute and hit this with a heat gun and get it nice and dry, or as dry as you're going to get it. Now when you're layering things, especially something with like the napkin, it's pretty absorbent, but it's going to take longer to dry than you even realize. So just because you hit it with a heat gun and you super fast dry it, don't let that fool you into thinking it's 100% dry, because it takes a little while for all the moisture to truly be gone. But I'll be right back. Okay, so I did hit this with the heat gun and dry it, but I can tell by the softness of the paper, and even just can feel that there's still damp in it. So like I said, you know, just because you think something is dry, don't be fooled into, you know, trying to rely on, oh, it's totally dry, because it might not be. So now that, you know, that part of it is dry, we can go back and work a little bit more on the hair and the face. And something that I wanted to mention was what really gives this dramatic effect to the hair is actually not the hair itself, it's the shading on the face. So I'm going to try to kind of replicate that for you here as well. So I'm going to get the watercolors back out, and I am going to get my current favorite brush anyway. And I'm actually going to mix up my favorite skin tone with watercolor. And I'll just do that pretty dark, and then I'll work with a lot of water to lighten it back up as I go, which I'll show you that in just a minute. First, I just want to get this mix made. All right, so this is, oops, this is kind of my standard basic skin tone, and I need to rearrange. Where can I put my tea? I'll put my tea over here. Hopefully it's not, yeah, it's not going to shadow the face. So I usually start pretty light. So what I basically do is get a brush that's pretty loaded with water, and I'll just kind of work over here in this section. And I'm just going to bring a little bit of that skin tone color in. Now it's going to mix with the color that I had that's dried here from the hair. So again, that's another one of those policies, I guess, that I always use, which is kind of starting back from a slightly dirty palette. It's totally not for everyone, and that's fine. I get that. So I'm just going to go through everywhere that I have shaded with my pencil, which is a little difficult maybe for you to see on the camera, but I kind of showed you a close-up, so you do know that there was quite a bit of pencil or graphite shading already done. So I'm going to use this really pale color to get started. And I think I mentioned that I tend to go lighter and work my way into the darker color eventually. And that is the kind of, let me think, that's kind of not, it's not the same thing. When I'm doing acrylics, I start out with darker colors and then I kind of build layers, lightening it up. And with oils, I do tend to start with my darks and then my lights, and then I blend everything. So each medium I seem to be finding a different way that I like to work with it. So now I'm just going to go a little darker by just picking up some of that color and kind of adding it to the mix that I'm already working with. I'm actually going to go really dramatic here because I don't want this video to be too long of a video, and I'd like to at least get the face done at this point. So again, I just follow all the shading lines that I did when I did the original drawing, with the exception that because I'm going really dark, at this point, I'm going to concentrate on the areas that I intend to be the darkest. But if you get it too dark, or like in this case, what I've got here is I've got an area that's too harsh of a line, all you have to do is rinse out your brush to clear water, and then just come along the edge of it and just smooth it out. If you pick up a lot, rinse again. I am tapping the excess water off of my brush, but I'm not like wringing it out or anything. So that will allow that area to, you know, fade a little and not be so drastic. Again, the same thing up here. I can just soften any of my harsh edges. This is a really important tip for getting a nice soft blend or transition, is to remember to go back in and soften all of your edges. And this works equally with faces, flowers, all of those things. You know, some edges you want to be harsh, especially when you're indicating the transition from a bright spotlight of light, like a highlight, to a dark shaded area. So it's important to kind of get a good grasp on that particular technique, I think. So now I'm still using the skin tone color. I'm just going to start fleshing out a little bit of the other features on the face and using it to help me put in shadows on top of the other features. So like the lips, the nose, the eyes, that sort of, you can see what I'm doing, so you know what I mean. And then I'm also going to use that skin tone color to kind of deepen up the eyebrows, as well as to continue like the outer lighter edge of the eyebrow that I didn't even paint when I put the pink down. Now I am going to completely rinse, and I'm going to work on an eye color. And in this particular case, I think I'm going to go with like this crazy bright green that's kind of similar to the green that's in the houses, the roofs of the houses. So I'm just going to use a really bright, it's probably, I don't know, like a leaf green or sap green or something, and then a little bit of yellow, and mix those together, kind of get a nice bright green. And I'm going to start out with the outer edge of the iris and just kind of plop that color right in there. And then just on the iris inside the iris, along that lash line, that upper waterline. And so from here, I probably can now start to darken the shadows along the upper hair, which kind of should be there should be some distinctive shadow between the hair and the forehead. So I'm actually going to just darken that skin tone a little bit more. Now this time I am going to dry my brush off, and I'm going to pull in a really rich color now. It's all still damp, even though it may not look like it's wet, it's not shiny, but it's definitely still damp here. So I'm not going to slather it on as much as I am almost kind of dropping color in. And again, this is another really good technique for learning to shade and learning how to have nice transition, nice blends with your shading and watercolor, is to figure out how to not wipe color away. Because when I first started learning, I would be, okay, I want to darken that, and so I'd start brushing color on, and I actually would get back to almost like I could start seeing white again because I was brushing away what was already on there, not realizing that my brush was too wet, and that I was not dropping color in. So if you're struggling with that, try loading your brush with color, and instead, you know, once the area is damp, drop the color in, almost like pointillism or something. Because it's not going to stay, if the area or the surface that you're working on is already wet, it's not going to stay right where you put that little drop. It's going to blend together. And then I'm going to actually use this to kind of deepen up some of these shadows that I had drawn in here, since I have this deeper color. And the paper's warping as I go. It'll flatten back out when it dries, but it means I'm kind of working on a curve, and that can be detrimental. You don't necessarily want to do that. So now I'm going to rinse, and where I was adding in that really dark color here at the top, it did give me a pretty distinctive line. So now I'm just going to take a damp brush that's damp with just clear water, and again, just like I showed before, I'm just going to soften that. And when it dries, it will look nice and a nice soft transition, unlike the cheeks, which are a hard transition. Intentionally, I knew I was going to have that when I did it. It works for me, and I'll kind of show you an example of how I work with that. So I'll just get a little of that pink, and I want it to be really light, so I'm just going to pull a little bit of that color in, and now I can just kind of go around, maybe a little more of that color. I'm just going to go around the whole thing and slightly larger than I originally did it, and put more of that color in. So now what will happen is it will cause it to gradually get a little larger and yet lighter around the edges. So it's almost like a, what do I want to say? It's almost like a graphic sort of style to it, like a pop style, I guess you would say. So that's pretty much it for today, because I think our video is probably going to be getting up there in length again. So I'm probably just going to take a little bit of a break with it and come back and finish the rest of this page, hopefully. Well, actually, I'm going to do one more thing. No, I'm gonna throw one more thing in here, even if it pushes us a little farther over the edge. So I introduced that bright green there into her eyes, but I kind of want to introduce it somewhere else, and I want to play up this edge that's here. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to paint it that green color. So I'm just going to mix up a lot more of that green. I have empty wells in my palette for this purpose, so that I can do a little bit of color mixing for common colors. So in other words, if there's colors that I always seem to find myself kind of mixing up, because I use a tube watercolor, I can re-wet it and add to it. So I just kind of reserve some of these little wells for just that purpose, and kind of always remix that color back into that little well. So this is a really light version of it. I may, I think I will probably darken it a little bit as I go, but first I'm going to just get a nice wash of this color all along this area. And I'm going to go right over the little houses that I have up here with it, just kind of tinting it with this green. So I'm using to my advantage the fact that that was there, instead of treating it like something I need to get rid of. So I hope that is kind of self-explanatory. So I'm mixing up just another mix, but a slightly stronger pigment load to this one. So it's going to have a little more color, and it's probably going to be a little more opaque, although nah, not really. These are pretty transparent colors that I usually choose to include in my color palette. I like transparent color, it's my thing. But you can get plenty of watercolors that are more opaque in nature if you like. Or you can use gouache, which I do love. I truly do love it. But I don't know, I just tend to always seem to gravitate towards more transparent paints. Even in oils and acrylics, I generally buy more transparent paint colors. And you can usually, the package will tell you the light fastness and the transparency and the series number. So there you go. Let me turn it back around, get this out of the way. I never leave my watercolor brushes sitting in the water. I haven't learned to develop that habit with acrylics yet, but so there you go. So now I've kind of used that, started anyway, using that to my advantage, and that's kind of what I wanted to show you. And then hopefully you kind of start to see the effects with the hair, although there is one thing that I'm going to do really quickly is just go ahead and darken up some of these edges, just the ones that are kind of framing around the face. because you don't want to get the shading on the face too drastically different in value than you have the hair that's around it. Unless, of course, you're doing like someone who has a really deep tan and really blonde hair, you know, then maybe it might, you know, not look as odd, but I kind of like to have a mix of both. And since I'm here messing around with it, I'll go ahead and put some of those really fine, I'm going to make a really dark area here at the very bottom, and a little bit larger one here. Because I'm working with this really wet and the face is still wet, it could pull some of this color in. If it does, I'm totally, you know, good with that. It doesn't bother me. And then I'm just gonna sculpt that a little to appear the way I want. Now I'm gonna just remember I was saying that you lose some of those finer little lines that if you're trying to make them. So now that the hair is, you know, a couple days dry now, I can actually come back in and sort of brush in some of those little crazy wandering sort of hairs that I like to do. And I can even grow that out a little bit and go a little crazy with it. So hopefully that is, you know, starting to give you a good representation of how I did the other girl. And then really quickly, because I can, because this video is already blown out my limit. No, I don't have an actual limit, but the limit I was trying to sort of set for myself. I'm just going to give it a nice, because I love splatter. You know me, you know splatter and my addiction to it. So I'm just going to add a little bit. And I put some in her hair as well. In fact, I did get a little spatter there on accident on her face. I don't know if you can see it, so I might as well just add a little more. So I got a lot there, right? So all I have to do is just lift a little bit of it. Okay, so, oops, I almost put that in with my acrylic. Not a good idea. I will dry that off, and then I'm going to just kind of show you a little bit. It's kind of difficult because it is really wet, but hopefully that helps to kind of explain for Terry how I was getting that effect with the hair. And this will dry, and we'll see whether or not tomorrow that we need to add any more to it, or if we're good to go, and we can finish off the page. All right, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Color versus or one of the differences anyway, versus a student. I forgot to put the headphones on. This will be a good blooper reel. Okay, starting over.